So we've seen that everything on an HTML page is a box. And that box has content, and then it has padding, and then it has a border, and then it has a margin. So that's the box model. And then we saw that we have box sizing border box. So that's a declaration with a property and value. The property is box sizing, the value is border box. And box sizing border box means that the padding, so content, padding, and the border will not increase the size of the box, right? So as we change padding and border, the size of the box doesn't change. This is helpful when we're laying out boxes around a page. We don't want them, as we start adjusting padding or border, we don't want them bumping things to the left and right. So that's a box sizing border box. So we have the box model, then we have box sizing border box, and then we have border radius, where we could kind of round the corners, and we also have margin. And with margin, we could set 0 auto, which would center things. So top and bottom, 0 margin. Left and right, automatically make them equal. So that's margin. And one of the important things we learned was that when we are setting 4 sides or 4 corners for something, we could have one setting, in which case it applies to all 4. And that would be TRBL, top, right, bottom, left, treble. Or we could have 2 settings, in which case it applies to top and bottom, right and left. Or we could have 4 settings, in which case it applies to top, right, bottom, left, right? Just around clockwise, top, right, bottom, left. So that's what we've seen. What we're going to learn now is the display property. And we're going to look at display block, display inline block. And I'm wondering if we're going to hit display none in this video. We're also going to hit that. So display is another property, and we could set it to different values. So by default, most elements have either a display property of block or inline. And when this is a little bit of a review too, we've already talked about this, right? But now we're going to look at some of the settings, and we're going to look at being able to override the display settings. All right, I just have to also add in that I teach this class here online, and then I also teach it in the classroom, and I'm also doing other stuff with HTML and CSS, teaching other people, other places. And so sometimes I get confused, like as I create this course over several months, did I already cover this in this class or was it my previous class? So apologies if I go over something a couple of times, but also know that this really helps reinforce learning. And so that's a good thing, because the more you roll around in something, the more it sticks. All right, so this is what we're going to see in this video. We're going to talk about the display property. And by default, things are either block or inline, generally speaking. And block properties begin a new line, and they take up the entire line, and they take up as much space as possible. So that's their default property. And you can nest inside of blocks. You can nest inside an inline element or other block level elements. So that's block, and we're going to see this. And then we also have inline elements, right? So inline elements automatically, right? By default, some elements are block level. Their display property is just by default block. And some are their display properties by default inline. And so inline elements do not begin a new line, and they take up as little space as possible. And you can nest inside inline elements, other inline elements. So we'll see some of these in a second. The display property can have many values. Actually, let's take a look at default block and inline right now, because I actually want to link to something there. So I'm going to open up File 33 Display, and then just click Show That. And you can see pretty much what I just told you right here. So feel free to pause this video and just read through these things if you'd like. So go ahead and pause the video now, but it's pretty much what I just articulated to you. So these would all be block level elements, right? All these blocks. And then this one is an inline level element. It's in line with other text. Block level elements, they start on the new line and they take up as much space as possible. Looks like I have these formatted to only go a certain extent. So body, max width on the body is 600 pixels and width is 80%. If I took those two out and refresh this, it takes up as much space as possible. So I still have a margin there, 0 auto, and padding. That's what's doing it. So if I take all of that off the body, right, these block level elements are taking up an entire line and as much space as possible. So that's a block level element. So I'm just going to turn all this back on. Actually, I don't know why I have that there. I guess it just makes it more readable. But it kind of shows what a block level element is better without that. So I'm going to get rid of it. There we go. Block level elements. And then inline elements, they don't take up a new line. They don't start a new line, and they're right there. So you can see all of the block level elements here, and you can see all of the inline elements here. And so here at MDN, inline elements, it just describes what I said to you already, occupies only the space bounded by the tags that define the inline element. And then here are the different inline elements. The main one here, which you will notice, is span. Right? That's one of the main inline level elements. Image, another really popular one. Anchor, another really popular one. So these are all of the inline elements. Okay? And then here we have all the block level elements. And let me refresh this page, and I'll show my highlights. There we go. Occupies the entire space of its parent element container, thereby creating a block. Browsers typically display the block level element with a new line before or after the element. So here are all the different block level elements. And they're the things we're already familiar with. Address, article, aside, nav, main, footer, to see if there's any other one, section, right? So all these are block level elements. Div right there, popular non-semantic one. So those are block level elements. So that's an introduction to the display property. The last thing and elements have by default, they're either block or inline, generally speaking. And we saw which elements were block or inline by default. And we learned the difference between block or inline. Block takes up an entire line by itself, takes up as much space as possible. Inline is just in line with the rest of the text. So it takes up as little space as possible, just wraps around the content that it's containing, and that's it. And then the last thing is we'll look at all the different properties for the display property. And so those are listed right here. And these are all the different settings we could set for display. So display could have these different values. But primarily we're going to use display none, display inline, display block, display inline block, and display flex. So these are things we will use to help style our web pages and help do our layout. So the main takeaway from this video is that there's this property, and the property is display. So when we have a CSS rule set, so the rule set is made up of the selector or selectors plus the declaration block. The declaration block is made up of declarations. Each declaration has a property and a value, right? So just take a look at that diagram again. So you can kind of put an image to the words that I'm saying. Right there. Right? So each rule set is made up of a selector or selectors and the declaration block. Declaration block is made up of declarations. A declaration has property and value. Right? And so we have as one of our declarations that's available in CSS, we have the property display. And the property display has all of these different values which we could set it to. Primarily we're going to be using the ones I've highlighted here in green. Right? And so that's going to allow us to do different things with our layout. And inline block and flex in particular will allow us to do some pretty neat stuff. So we're going to see how we work with display to do some cool layout things in the next couple of videos.